Hi, good morning. I think we're about to get started. Thanks everybody for coming. The second day of our National Summit on Solutions for Student Loan Debt. My name is Kevin Fudge. I'm the Director of Consumer Advocacy and the Ombudsman at ASA. And this morning we're going to be talking about borrowing more wisely and choosing the right financial fit. For most of you who may know the college process, so much has been said about making sure you have the right academic fit, you have the right social fit for your college experience. And in recent years, we've been adding to the discussion, making sure you have the right financial fit. So we're going to come at this from a few different angles today. I have three distinguished panelists who are going to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about what they do. I'll ask them a few questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience to have questions to make this as much of an engaging dialogue as possible. So without further ado, I'm going to allow John Hupolo to introduce himself.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? Good morning. As the husband of a now no longer suffering Chicago's Cubs fan, I have to tell you the emotion and anxiety that was coursing through our house last night was second only to when we put our two girls through their college process. So this is really a great opportunity. I want to thank ASA, and I'll just take a moment and say that I had the pleasure of serving on the board at ASA for a few years. After I had served some time in the investment banking world, I was also the chief financial officer at First Marblehead Corporation here in Boston. So I have really in the mud knowledge about the private credit student loan market and the fear and anxiety that people have about what it is the college process is. So I want to thank ASA for having this. As a former board member, very proud to have an opportunity to be here. I also want to thank ASA for being the proud sponsors of our book, Plan and Finance Your Family's College Dreams. Dr. Peter Mazareas, who I believe is here, and I wrote that book in June to try and help provide a plain English guide for families to understand what it is. And we titled the book, Plan and Finance Your Family's College Dreams. And I started this title slide by saying the dream of college without the nightmare of excessive debt. And that's really what we want to talk about today. Does anyone know who this character is, Felix Baumgartner? So Felix is an Australian. He is a daredevil. He teamed up with Red Bull to take a balloon made of a piece of plastic a little bit less than what you see in a garbage bag, 24 miles into the stratosphere, for the math nerds, 127,852 feet into the air. This is a picture of him just as he's about to launch himself. And he says, and you can Google this, it's really fascinating, "I'm going home now." And then he casually leans forward, does a free fall for 4 minutes and 19 seconds. He goes 843.6 miles an hour. That's a 1.25, Mach 1.25. The only person in the world ever to create a sonic boom by himself without the aid of a vehicle. Then the engineers realize while he's in this free fall, he's going to start spiraling out of control in a death spiral, so they teach him how to right himself, and he lands on his feet. And this is inspiring to me. You say, well, what is this all about? This inspired me in 2012 to realize that if we as a society and people can engineer a system that allows a human being to go 128,000 feet in the air and land on their feet, why do we have so much trouble getting college graduates to land on theirs? It makes no sense. A college graduate should be able to come out with a diploma. They should come out with a semblance of a job or going to grad school. And they should come out with an amount of debt that's reasonable for what their future is. And that's, I think, Kevin, what we want to talk about today. So the way we thought about this when we started when we first started Invite Education, and we started thinking about what we wanted to do and how we wanted to help the dialogue around this very tricky issue, we said there are really only two questions. When you boil all the emotion out of it, there are only two questions that 12th grade families have to answer. Can the kid get into the school they want? And, importantly, Kevin's point, can we afford it? And let me just ask this. I've been doing this poll when I've been doing this talk recently. Who thinks here that the most important factor for college fit is the social and academic fit? How about affordability as the most important factor? And then who thinks they're equally important? All right, good. I'm so glad to see the guidance counselor voted on this. Thank you. No, and seriously, though, when I ask that question, it breaks exactly this way each time. About a third of the audience thinks each is right, and of course there's no right answer. But the idea that we're thinking about this now is really important. And we titled our book about the dream because I asked the question, two questions. First of all, whose dream is it? Is it the student's dream or is it the parent's dream? Right? And we know that if the student's not properly motivated, there could be unlikely to complete. And we talked about completion yesterday in a lot of detail. Let me just put a few numbers for you on the completion. 1/3 of all student loan defaulters are non-completers. 1/3. Loans less than $10,000 are responsible for 2/3 of all the defaults in the country. Loans less than $5,000, not much, $5,000, 35% of all the defaults in the country. If you don't complete, you're going to default. That's pretty much the message. So this completion issue is really, really important. Completers, how many folks, the categories are less than 10, 10 to 20, 20 plus. Completers, what's the default rate for those who complete? Less than 10%? Between 10 and 20%? More than 20. More than 20. 9%. Completers default at 9%, recent data. It's really pretty phenomenal. So the question is, whose dream is it and what's the dream? And I think of it a lot like when I would say to an 18-year-old, you know what, you need a car. So what I want you to do is go down to the local dealership and go and buy the car of your dreams. Load it up. Buy whatever car you want. And we're going to worry about how we're going to pay for it later. And I think that's what we do sometimes with high school students. You know, we have that dream as a parent, say, I want the best for my kid, whatever that means to me or the child. I want the best for them, so I'm going to figure out how to stretch to make that dream happen. And I think that that's really a huge issue. No parent in their right mind would say to their 18-year-old, just go down and pick out a car. But we're saying to them, go pick out a school. So the question is the dream to go to college, or is the dream to go to the most expensive brand school you can get into? And that's a really fundamental question, and it's a premise for what I'm going to talk about in just a few minutes. Here we've seen some of these, I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. 20 years of growth, you can see it's straight line up. The 2016 College Board numbers, if you haven't seen the College Board trends analyses that came out last week, please go and look at them. It's really important. The numbers now for private schools are over $40,000, but the trend line is what I want you to see. The trend line is up. I'm framing this because parents come back and we talk a lot about emotion and we talk about what the questions are. When you boil the process down, it's not all that complicated about what you need to do to get into school. It's the emotion and what parents are taking in and what students are taking in from the press and from their friends and the cocktail parties. What are they hearing? Prices are up, all-time high. True. What do they also say? Well, now we have student loan debt. We talked about this yesterday as well. I wanted to put some skin on these bones. Look at what we're looking at here. Most of the debt, something on the order of 64%, is incurred by students under 30 to 40. So with 10 or 15-year repayment loans, that sounds pretty reasonable. But look at the top. The top of the graph says these are 50s, 40, 50, 60-year-olds who have over 25% of the debt that they're responsible for. The other really important piece here, 1.2 trillion. Right? We've heard that number a lot, 1.2 trillion of total outstanding debt. I want to show you what $1.2 trillion looks like. This is a $100 bill. A lot of us have seen a $100 bill. If you have 100 of those $100 bills in a stack, it looks something like this. By the way, these are $1 bills, so don't mug me on the way out. This would be $10,000 in my hand. $10,000. This is 100 million, so it's on a pallet, right? We get the idea, it's pretty good. This is a billion, still, and then a trillion is a million. It's big, people know that. But just think of it conceptually, our debt is 20% greater than this pile. It's just absolutely phenomenal. Why else are parents confused? They're hearing these big numbers, they're seeing these numbers. Well, then I go to the FAFSA guide. Look at the FAFSA guide. This is only the beginning, the introduction of what the FAFSA is. It's 98 pages. So I'm a parent, hey, I'm going to go figure out this FAFSA thing. Let me download this. Oh, no, it's 98 pages just to get through the intro. So I wanted to put that in a little bit of context. The press oftentimes focuses on not the majority of students who are landing on their feet, but the noisy minority who are getting a lot of the press, and sometimes deservedly so because things happen sometimes not well, but sometimes not. When you look at the actual facts, though, the perception sometimes does not equal the reality. When you ask parents, they overestimate the cost of college by almost 200%. 50% of them overestimate the amount of loan payment by 50%. Now, what we saw in 2015-16, 34% of all costs were paid via scholarships and grants. Grant and institutional aid is up very significantly. I have some data from the most recent College Boards. I wanted to tell you this. 70% of full-time students get some aid. Institutional grant aid almost doubled over the last 10 years, from $29 billion to almost $55 billion. Grant aid now exceeds $125 billion. So there's money out there. That's more than all the loans that were made last year. Loan volume is a little over 100 billion, grant aid 125 billion. Outcomes, let's talk about outcomes. Bachelors, 25 to 34, median earnings, 69% greater than high school grads. They're making now close to $50,000. If they're borrowing 30 or 40 and they're making 50, that's a good metric. Median family income headed by four-year college households, 111,270, same cohort. That's twice what high school graduates make. So when you look at these facts, you have to come away with the conclusion that a majority of students and families are actually figuring it out pretty well. And so the question becomes, what do you do to help everyone else along the way? Here we have some savings plans now in place. Back in the 90s, Peter Mazareas and others helped start the 529 college savings programs in this country. Now we see plan assets of over $250 billion. So we're seeing some families. I also wanted to draw this question, and I know we had this, Jesse yesterday talked about the Lumina study, which I think is absolutely outstanding. But the question of affordability, and when I talk to parents about affordability, they always say, well, what do you mean? Well, they're all different definitions, and there's a spectrum of them. And this is really interesting. The Lumina Foundation has that rule of 10. It said find the net price of the college, and it's affordable if by working 10 hours a week and the family save 10% of discretionary income over 10 years, then that's an affordable school. That's one metric done by research. Another, a simpler method, Don Heller from Michigan State said it's like Justice Stewart's definition of obscenity. You know it when you see it. Well, frankly, I'm not sure that either one of those guys are helping a family with the practical issues that they have. So we started thinking about what is it that would make, how do we talk to families about affordability? And it's interesting because, frankly, guidance counselors don't want to talk to families about personal financial information, and others are reticent to do that. And we started thinking, well, what could we do? How can we talk to parents? How can we give them some guide for what an affordable education could be? And here's the metric that we come up with and we talk about all the time. And it's actually pretty simple. And none of this requires a math degree. It's all right there. Question for the family, how much have you actually saved? Not how, now it's too late. You can't be optimistic, you can't be pessimistic. How much do you have? Whatever that number is. Are there any gifts that are going to come in? Can you or your student contribute income while a student's in school? Have an idea of what the estimated financial aid might be. There are ways to do that now. If all of that is equal to or greater than the cost of the school, then that's an affordable school. You don't need a lot of metrics for this. For most families, that's not going to be the case, and that's where the trouble starts for some. But the question really is, how much is the right amount to borrow? And lots of us talk about it, and there's a metric around that says if the total loans, and that's really key, total borrowing, not the first year borrowing, projected four-year costs. We talked yesterday about how many schools will front-end load scholarships. So the idea is how much reasonably do you think you're going to have to borrow? What do you think that expected starting salary is going to be? And then they say, well, wait a minute, my kid's in high school, I have no idea. Well, you have an idea. You have a pretty good idea. Is this kid good in math and science? They're going to move toward the arts? Are they going to be in the middle somewhere? You can go and get a spectrum. You can get in the right ballpark of how much they're likely to make. And so you do the math. And it's not hard to do. There are calculators out there. But again, I think families can have a better view of what an affordable school is with the information that they have, and if they sit and think about it a little bit different frame. So the takeaways here are that families are consumers of education. Colleges are sellers of a product, which is the education. And no one should be confused. Colleges are in the business of educating students. And the metric that they use is, well, what's my net tuition revenue dollars? Because although they may be nonprofits, they have to make money, right? It's just the way it is. I believe that affordability is within every family's control. I also believe that not all student loan debt is bad debt. In fact, responsible borrowing helps students create a track record and credit early in their careers that helps them and leverages them as they go forward. Tell students that they should pay interest in school when they can, and also to borrow as little as possible. And again, I think that it's really important for families to have plain English information, tools, information, and services to allow them to start to put their arms around what an affordable school is for that particular family. And I would be reticent if we didn't tell you this is the book that we wrote to talk about all of this. And we really did it from the frame that we want families to have that plain English guide. And we spent a lot of time thinking and doing discussions with families about how do you think about this. And we think that better information will help. Also, please follow us on our blog or on Twitter. We write a lot about these issues, and we'd love to hear from you and get your feedback. Again, Kevin, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today.
Excellent. Thanks, John. Thank you very much, John. That was very informative. Now we have Nan Morrison, who's the president and CEO for the Council for Economic Education.
If I keep sitting, you'll never see me. So, good morning, everybody. It's great that you're here and not out there eating more of the bagels and really good lox, and I say that as a New Yorker, although I was thrilled about the Cubs last night, if not the Mets. The Cubs, it's okay, but we're going to get you guys next year. I really am happy to be here this morning. It's really great for me to have these opportunities to speak to this important group of people, and I really want to thank ASA, all of the folks for inviting me, and I also want to thank the Bank of America Charitable Organization Foundation. They support a lot of our thought leadership activities and help us when we want to come and do things like this, which are so very important. So let's get to it. So while this is a forward-thinking group, I'm going to take a little step back. I want to start talking about our mission a little bit and why we got to where we are. So my talk is a little bit more foundational. I want to try to get people thinking about this stuff before they even start to talk to John. So the mission of the Council for Economic Education is to communicate the rationale for teaching economics and personal finance to grades K through 12 and build the capacity to do so. We train the teachers. We began to do this right after World War II, when a group of educators and economists realized that the world was going to be more complex, and that meant we needed better education for our people. This was also a response at the time to a growing threat of communism. That's more on the economic side of things than the personal finance, but that's why the council was originally formed, and it was a group of educators, unions, labor, government. It was a very private sector. It was a broad-based group, and it still is. So when they looked around, what they saw was that there were no textbooks, no teacher training, no political will even to teach economics or personal finance to our kids, even at the high school level, let alone in grade school. So here we were, the world's greatest economy, making no investment in teaching people about participating in that economy. And still, we're failing to do that. And if you look at our 2016 survey of the states, you'll see that very few states require personal finance or economics to be taught. Only 17 require a personal finance class, only 6 require it to be tested. And in states where there is financial education, more kids have higher credit scores, and they have lower loan default rates. Very powerful. So over time, the council responded to many of these urgent financial and economic dilemmas and figured out that we just needed to stick to our message, which is you have to get this information to kids and to their parents. So I haven't been here for that whole time, only about 6 years, but even though these things ebb and flow, financial and economic education came to the fore again with the spate of mortgage defaults. Seemed like a good idea for people to know where they were getting their mortgages from, and even though we give more education now, it sort of doesn't let the banks, the regulators off the hooks. Apologies to any of the banks and regulators in the room, but it really takes everybody. Good information, good knowledge, good education, and I would say some ethical responsibility. So interest ebbed again. The economy sort of got better. Then it became prominent again due to the election, bringing forward a lot of the issues around economics and the economy, which is great. And student debt came up, although I would say that neither candidate has spent a huge amount of time talking about education, which I think is really sad on both sides of the aisle. So whether or not kids can afford college or trade school is also, of course, fundamental to another question, which is the question of opportunity and closing the income gap. We all know the story that kids graduating from college, a lot of them have few prospects, and they have a lot of debt relative to what they're going to earn. And I don't want to refute any of the myths, because I know that data and I agree with you. But it's the kids who are making the least that seem to be hurt the most. So I have a friend who's a teacher who is very, very concerned about one of her students, and this young lady was the first in her family to go to college. So she came from a very disadvantaged background. She was taking on a lot of debt, but very excited, as her family was, because she was going to college. So what was she studying? Acting. Okay. So I said to my friend, just what I did now. I thought, okay, acting. We have a niece who's studying acting, too. She's great, but it's really not going to make it. So my friend said to me, now wait a minute, are you saying that only the children of well-to-do parents should be allowed to take the risk of a bigger dream, of having a liberal education? That was a couple of years ago, and I think really hard about that. What choices are we helping our kids to make? What's fair and what's not fair? Do we have the right to steer children towards certain things because they have a lot of debt, or they don't have a lot of debt, or don't want to take on a lot of debt? It's a really complex set of questions, which is another reason why we think we need to start early with both the kids and the parents. So I really do want that young lady to have her dream, but I also want her to be able to live a fruitful life, and if she can, to help her family with their needs. So one of the fundamental skills that economic and personal financial education teaches kids is not just about the dollars and cents stuff, it's about how to make good choices. They need to recognize choice in their lives. They need the tools to analyze what their decisions mean. And incredibly, we actually find that the kindergartners are pretty darn good at this, and they like doing it. We have courses for teachers to integrate economics and personal finance into a wide range of classes: math, children's literature, social studies, civics, which is still taught here and there. That is why one of my favorite programs is our K-5 after-school program. And at the end of it, there's a market day. The class is basically turned into a mini economy. It teaches even the 5-year-olds about scarcity, opportunity cost, trade, supply and demand. I have to tell you, watching a group of kindergartners learn about trade is totally adorable. Sometimes they have a little trouble because they don't quite have that sharing thing down yet. So when they're trading among the tables, it gets a little iffy sometimes, like, yeah, you can trade, it's okay. But they get it. And what's nice is all of these concepts are starting to get ingrained in them when they're really little. And even though the activities vary, they're buying and selling things, they're paying taxes, they're doing all sorts of great stuff. My favorite slogan from one of the market days was, they made little hockey pucks, big Boston thing, and they said, buy our pucks so we can get more bucks. I loved it. This was like a first grader. It was so darling. But what's really great about this is they're gaining confidence about their ability to navigate the world. They understand numbers, they understand math, they understand business, they understand finance. They're getting that. So when they get to that 98-page instruction form, it's not quite so overwhelming, although anything to me that's more than 10 pages is overwhelming. I'm a math person. So teachers love this because, of course, they're still hitting off all the standards, math, English, etc. But the dollar and cent side of life is now being transformed for them to something not to worry about or be scared of, but to a set of ideas and concepts that they can actually master. So they start to understand choice, responsibility, self-worth, and most importantly, how to start thinking about investing in their own human capital, which, after all, is what education is about. We also run some special programs for Hispanic students and their families. Why? This isn't a one-size-fits-all deal. We have, one of the comments that you made, and I know it was just colloquially, was in plain English. Well, we know a lot of kids whose parents don't speak English, and they're not speaking English at home. So think about how much more complicated this would all be if it was in a language that wasn't your first language or that you were really, really unfamiliar with. So we put together this program so we could address the very specific needs in that community. I'd also like to turn to, I talked about the younger kids, but more germane to this audience, is our college and career readiness program. So what we do, and this is classic for CE, is we provide in-person professional development for the teachers. And we talk to them about all the subjects, because remember, a lot of them are just like any other person, parent. They don't understand what all of the options and what this might mean for them. A lot of them don't understand, the very basics of investing or how credit works themselves. So we explore a variety of topics that are relevant then to this subject for them and their students. So the true cost of college, the sticker price versus the actual price, scholarships, loan, work study, 529 plans, all the things that guidance counselors should and can be talking about with their parents. Understanding, establishing credit, John talked about that a little bit, savings, budgeting. It's not just about taking out a student loan, right? You have to think about this holistically. So we cover all of those subjects in our college and career readiness program, and we like to start in 9th grade. Even though we think that's a little too late, we'd love to start teaching all the little kids, at least if we can start in 9th grade, even in middle school, for the whole family, then they have a shot. We're doing some very special work at Cristo Rey High School. Is there anybody here that is familiar with the Cristo Rey schools? Yeah, they're fabulous, right? So this is a series of Jesuit schools across the country. There are about 28 high schools now. Every one seems to pop up every few months. And they seek children from families who are making less than $30,000 a year, right? So these are parents who don't even know to say, hey, I should be looking at a private school or a Catholic school or some other venue, or in New York, you can opt out of your school district if you don't think it's very good. You can get in a lottery to do something else. So these schools find these students, and they're focused on getting them into college. And going back to one of your first questions, they provide the education, they provide the social context, they follow the kids through school, and now they realize they also have to really help on the financial side of things. So I couldn't be prouder than to say we're working with them not only on economics and social studies, but it's a work-study program for the kids, so we're integrating personal finance into their assemblies every week, and we're doing parent programs too, because if you think you might be daunted by a 98-page FAFSA guide, think about a parent who is maybe relatively new to this country, barely speaks English. It's a whole new world, a whole new world. The language and vocabulary of finance is foreign to them. So we're really honored to be able to do that work. I referenced before the FINRA study that shows that over time, when you have a state that has required financial education, and teachers get better and better at teaching this, because their knowledge increases and their skill at teaching increases, it's better for the kids in those states. Higher credit scores, lower loan default rates. This is what really helps to improve kids' lives. It makes them optimistic. It gives them the opportunity to understand that they can make it. And it helps the teachers be more confident in communicating that to their students. So it's our view at the council that personal finance and economics should be woven into the everyday life of the classroom right from the beginning, to give kids the language and vocabulary of these subjects so that when they get to this point, they can have the dialogue when they're with their families. It's not a scary topic. It's one where they can really dig in and have that great conversation instead of being adrift in what really is a big series of decisions for the family. So I hope that that's helpful, gives you a little context of where we're coming from, and I look forward to the discussion.